So with that, let's jump into this Ark update. The Ark is going to be a full-scale representation of Noah's Ark, built over in northern Kentucky. A number of you I know have been to the Creation Museum. Who's been there? Yeah, so maybe half of us. It's about 45 minutes from the Creation Museum. And so it's opening this summer. And it's going to open to the public on July 7. Actually, it's going to be open day and night for the first 40 days and 40 nights, taking that from the July 7 Genesis 7:7 passage, 40 days and 40 nights. So their idea was to build a full-scale representation of the Ark and use it as the Creation Museum is, as a means to present the Bible and salvation to folks, and be an encouragement and show how the Ark could actually have functioned with feeding of the animals, cleaning out wastes, and so on. They've got about 800 acres. It's on a mess of hills, so they had to level off some of the hills to build this. 300 cubits. If you take a cubit is like 21 inches as opposed to maybe 18 that some do, will make it 510 feet long, 51 feet high, 85 feet wide. They expect a ton of visitors. The museum had 400,000 visitors. The first year they expect 1.2 million. The same company that gave them the predictions for the museum has given them the predictions for the opening of the Ark. They'll have the same, same idea of presenting the 7 C's of history. Oh boy, I should have written this out. Creation, catastrophe, yeah.
Christ is in there somewhere.
Yeah, Christ, cross, consummation is in there too. Anyway, I've got it. Here it is. Creation, corruption for sin, catastrophe, confusion, Christ, cross, and consummation. Have a large budget. Like this building, if you remember, got to the, I'm sure Mike could comment on this, so you get close and how are we possibly going to get this thing open in time for the July 7 thing, but a lot of things come together quickly at the end, and so I think they're hoping for that too, because when I was there back in, I think it was April, they had a long ways to go. 3 decks. If you're familiar with the museum, you kind of go on ramps. The same thing will be true here. The designer of the sets or displays at the museum, same person's heading up that. They're building them off-site, so I assume right now they're bringing those displays, 132 displays in. It's something like 3 times as many displays as at the museum if you've been to the museum. I guess I should have said at the beginning, the museum's about, 5 hours east of here in northern Kentucky. They intend, if things work out, to have other phases. I said there's like 800 acres altogether. So they intend eventually to build like a walled city. They intend to have a Tower of Babel. And they intend to have like first century village as well. So they have a vision for making this a big theme park area as finances and so on maybe come to fruition. It'll be the largest timber structure in the world. This I thought was interesting. We toured back in April, and Carol said, "Look at that." We were in a stairwell, and already there were some stalactites forming, giving the the lie to the idea, stalactites there, giving the lie to the idea that it takes many ages for stalactites to form. I've seen a similar thing like that. You just have to have the right conditions. In the former Sears parking deck in downtown Peoria, I remember seeing exactly the same thing. It doesn't take long for stalactites to form if you have the right conditions. If you go to the Ark Encounter site, there are video clips that you can view showing different parts and stages of the construction. And I want to stress that if you want to go there this summer, you want to make sure to check in advance and get tickets in advance, because you can't just walk in and get tickets the day you show up. You have to have the tickets in advance. Okay, so let's see. I'm not a great technology person. Let's see if we can do what I want to do here. Oh, yeah, thank you, lights. So there's the parking lot.
Kill the whole side.
Let me back up. So there's the Interstate 75 running north and south. The parking lot's right there. They'll have 11 shuttle buses. And you're going to get on this road, and you won't see the Ark until you get back up the valley, the little bridge over creek area. And then you'll come up and you'll see the Ark. This is the stern. The bow is this with the high area. They'll have a little pond here in front. This is a zoo, petting zoo back here. The queue lines are going to be underneath here. That's the bow. There's the big pond. This is a restaurant for 2,000. There's the petting zoo area. The back side of the Ark is the mechanical, the stairwells, the elevator shafts, restrooms. So, it did work. Okay, so I said earlier what we want to do is to then, well, let me just say, are there any questions about Ark that I could quickly answer? Full-scale representation of the Ark should be really quite cool. If you've been to the museum, the displays are just really professional. If you've not been to the museum, the displays are professional quality. It's not a fly-by-night operation. Yes, sir?
Is that the color the finish is going to be on it, or are they going to put a, like...
I don't know. I'm assuming it'll be more darker, but I don't know.
Speaking from the construction side of things, what you were seeing was a building wrap and insulation being put across the exterior, so there has to be something else put on.
Okay, good deal. So, any other questions, comments? Yeah, Bill.
Where did they cut to? Forests or?
I've heard this. I think they cut like dead wood or diseased wood, and I think it came from out like in Colorado or Wyoming or something like that, but don't hold me to that. Amish guys did the craftsmanship on the work. Some of the pillars or whatever inside are massive. Yep.
So did they use modern machines to build it, or?
Yeah, I think they use CNC type machines, and if you go to some of the other videos that are like that, they'll show you constructing the different ribs laid out on the ground, and then they took a crane and put the ribs in position. Yep.
Yeah, for those that don't believe in the creation, like the Noah flood, the way they constructed that, would they use that as an argument that people in those ages couldn't have built?
Couldn't have done that. If you've been to the museum, you know that they have a small scale ark inside there with the wooden pegs and shows the interlocking of the wood segments. So I think I'm fairly confident they'll have at least one of those 132 displays showing how the construction would have been accomplished. Yeah, I'm sure they'll do that because they have that in the museum.
The people were much more patient in Noah's day.
Well, and remember, they had 120 years, I think, he had to build the thing. It didn't happen overnight, I'm quite sure. Yeah. Well, we probably should move on. You can ask more later. So, the second segment here is I want to talk about these creation scientists to refute, as I said, some of the comments that folks make, like teaching creationism is indoctrination. It's a form of child abuse. Another one says same thing. Bill Nye, creation is not appropriate for children. We need scientifically literate voters and taxpayers in the future. We need engineers that can build stuff and solve problems. Implication is if you're creationist, Christian creationist, you can't build stuff, you can't solve problems, and you're stupid. It's absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody who claims they do not believe in evolution, the person is ignorant, stupid, or insane. Illiterate people need to be removed from the ranks of teachers. After I wrote an editorial about 4 years ago to the Journal Star, one of my cousins, who was at Bradley at the time and was like the leader of their atheist group, creationism can be not only logically and scientifically unsound, but those who cling to such archaic beliefs can have severe and sinister consequences for the future of our country. So you run into sometimes people that, you know, are not very accepting of creation science. But I want to point out that there's a lot to refute that. And then finally, lots of resources mentioned before. So up here on the board, some of you may have been thinking, what are these? My table, somebody mentioned, well, we know pi, top right, summation, I, f of x, mathematical terms. Anybody know mathematician who came up with those? Euler. What about anybody recognize some of those other symbols there? Yeah.
The rest of them are elemental side.
No, they're not elemental. Actually, the PA might be protactinium. I don't know. They're not chemical elements. They're not meant to be chemical elements, no. But you're in the right ballpark.
Like Kelvin and Newton and
Yes.
Joule.
Kelvin, K. Newton, N. J, joules. Faraday, Farad, Pascal, Henry, and Dalton. Those are all scientific units of measure in the SI system. Now, you don't have to be an engineer or a science student to know those things. The one that's PA, the Pascal, every one of us, whether you're a scientist or an engineer or not, knows that or can or will at some point, because the Pascal is the unit of pressure. Now, there's lots of units of pressure. Pounds is the most common we use. But if you go out to your car and you look at the side of your tire, you're going to see it has like a maximum PSI, pounds of pressure. But they will also list KPA, kilopascals. kilo is the prefix for 1,000. PA is for pressure, kilopascals. Indeed, if you have a little handy-dandy air pressure gauge, this one happens to be, I was surprised to see, I opened it up, showing my aunt actually. She was in the car, and she, "What are you going to do tomorrow?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to be talking." I said, "We're going to talk about pressure." And by golly, I looked at this, and I'm glad she brought it up because it has PSI, but if you turn it, there's KPA. So kilopascals, unit of pressure. These guys are all Christian scientists.
Not Christian scientists.
Yes. I actually thought that I got to be careful with that. Christians who are creationists who are scientists. Yes. So Kelvin is for temperature, Pascal for pressure, Newton for force or weight. The joule is a unit of energy. The farad is a unit of capacitance, stored charge. Faraday's number of electrons in a mole of electrons. The Dalton is atomic mass units, and the Henry is for electrical inductance. Out on the table, there's 4 or 5 books that talk about creation scientists. There's also a stack of pamphlets there. You can take one of the pamphlets. Please don't take the books. But any of the like one-page pamphlets you can take. And there's a stack of the pamphlets that talks about creationist scientists, a few of them. There's a couple of other books out there in that same area on the far side of the counter that have little, like, one page about each of these guys. A lot of these guys, especially early on in the introduction to their works, would give some kind of credit to the creation, the creator, a testimony, they would say. Their correspondence indicates their Christian and creationist backgrounds. So also a number of laws that we're familiar with. If you've been in chemistry, you know PV equals PV. Pressure times volume is a constant. Boyle's law. If you've been in physics, you know F equals ma. Newton's second law of motion. Force is proportional to mass and acceleration. Planetary orbits are elliptical, which is Kepler's first law of planetary motion. Cells come from cells, Virchow, and total pressure is the sum of the partial pressures, is one of the things that Dalton did. So a number of laws. You also have like Maxwell's electromagnetic equations. So many of the branches of science were founded by believers in creation. Now, when I wrote that editorial, one of the nice responses was, well, the person cited 2 of the scientists that I referenced, and they said, well, these guys were before Darwin, so you couldn't technically call them creationists. Well, but wait a minute, let's think about this. We use that term creationist today, but early on, everybody was a creationist. All these scientists were creationists, whether they were Christians or not. Some of them weren't. But the guys I'm citing were both Christians and creationists. They were creationists in the sense that they believed God created stuff. There was no hint early on, way back, I'm talking way back, that they weren't. I mean, people just accepted the Bible. So anyhow, the origins of physics, you may remember some of those guys, Newton's laws of motion. Biology, Carolinus Linnaeus is the guy who gave you the biological nomenclature system with genus and species classifications. He was responsible for that. Mendel with genetics. Pasteur showing that you couldn't just have stuff coming out of nothing. The founders of these branches of science were all Christians and creationists. Now, some other guys, of course, were not, that did work. I'm not at all to say that all the scientists were Christians and creationists, but many of the major ones were. Boyle is considered by English people to be the father of chemistry, although most people accept a French guy, actually, but certainly very important. Early astronomers were creationists and Christians, and geology likewise. So these guys did just a mass of different stuff. Just a mass of different stuff. I mentioned Euler halfway down with the symbols, mathematician, and I've just listed some of the stuff. The other thing you need to know about the early scientists is that a lot of them weren't just into biology or just chemistry, but these were people who did a whole range of stuff. They would study archaeology, they would study biology, they would study math, they would do astronomical observations, wide variety of things. Neil asked, how do we know some of these folks? And I mentioned by the prefaces in a number of their works, by their correspondence, some of the quotes like by Pasteur, or at the bottom, George Washington Carver, here in the United States, of course, is known for working with what? Peanuts and sweet potatoes, and finding just multiple, hundreds of uses of peanuts and sweet potatoes. The founder of the scientific method, the experimental method that anti-creation people like some that I quoted here today would look to science and the scientific method. The founder was Bacon. Kepler, the astronomer, his 3 laws of planetary motion, explaining the motion of the planets. Newton, at the time the greatest physicist and mathematician, co-discoverer of calculus, laws of motion, inverse square law for gravity, did all kinds of things with optics and color and telescopes. Pascal, we mentioned, a unit of pressure named for him. So if you don't know any of these other guys because you don't have a science background, everybody can remember Pascal because, as I mentioned, the tire pressure. Just look at the tire of your car and you remember Pascal. He's reputed to have developed probability, the mathematical branch of probability from an incomplete card game. And what's the probability that we'll get this result if we continue the game? I don't know if that's actually accurate or not, but you read about that as in his background. The various scientists, I think, give the lie to the idea that Christians and creationists are ignorant and can't do science, haven't given us useful stuff. It's just not true. People don't think. I think a lot of the evolutionary folks, well, some of them are just atheists and they're just striking out at anything related to Christ. But the great mass, I believe, are just sheep that are following along because it's easier to follow and not say, let's think about this. And they just don't know that many of the units that they use are named for these people that they're saying are ignorant and should be kicked out of teaching. So I guess the takeaway from this, I'd hope that everybody would know that in some kind of general sense, you'd recognize or remember that lots of creation scientists, there's lots of materials, and that we don't need to hang our heads and think, man, I'm dumb. Now, that's not to say that you won't run up against people that are smarter than you or that know more than you. I always have that as a disclaimer. If you watch the Star Wars movies, Phantom Menace, when they were in the Naboo Ocean in the submersible, and they were about to get swallowed by the big fish, and another bigger one swallowed that fish. There's always a bigger fish. There's always somebody smarter than me. There's always somebody that knows more than me. Sometimes there's people that think they know more, and they really don't because they're confused. They're just parroting what others have told them incorrectly. But you always need to be aware that have a humble attitude, be loving and kind, but be confident that, that there's a lot of giants in the history of science. They're creationists and Christians. What else do I want to say? Materials that are out there, I guess, let's see. So there are books ranging from, I think they're called board books, or the idea being they're cardboard ones for younger kids. There are some of the magazines like Answers have a kids section that folds out. Again, grandpas, dads, uncles, whatever, kids love dinosaurs, and there's all kinds of books that are dinosaur related. Nice picture ones, but they also have a lot of good information in them. Very interesting. This is the prime one that lists little blurbs of, I don't know, 150 different science guys, half a page each. There are others. This one talks about 21 of them, and there's a pamphlet out there that you can take that has some of those. I mentioned before that journals go from technical journals here and here to more popular ones, Answers, Creation, and the ICR, Acts and Facts. There's all kinds of DVDs and series of DVDs, from medical ones about the body, fearfully and wonderfully made, for example, to geology, how could the ark actually work, to astronomy. There's one called Thousands, Not Millions of Years that talks about current research dealing with various radioactive dating methods and how they can be readjusted. There are various creation organizations. There's Answers in Genesis. They do the Creation Museum over in Kentucky, and they're directly related to the Ark project. There's the Institute for Creation Research. Used to be in California, moved to Dallas, Texas, I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that. There's Creation Ministries International, which originally came from Australia. Ken Ham used to be associated with that when he was still in Australia, and then he went to Institute of Creation Research, and then he, I don't know, 20 years ago probably founded Answers in Genesis. But this group has perhaps the best website for referencing questions and answers. Creation Research Society publishes the the technical journal there. There's a group in Colorado, I believe it is, that is pretty good and does like summer camps and tours and stuff out west. The Creation Moments organization mainly does like 1.5 minute blurbs for radio. And so thanks to a number of people for help. I taught at Peoria Heights High School, small school, 2 science teachers. I was the chemistry, physics, general science person, and then there was a biology guy. In general science, I had a unit where I would talk about geology and stuff, and I presented both sides of the creation and evolution view, and only got in trouble with that once, but I was able to, and it was kind of delicious because the person that complained was at that time a school board member, and I said, well, you approved the curriculum, and it was in there that we would present both sides. Now, I suspect since then that's been removed in the 30 years since that happened, because, you know, curriculums are changing all the time and so on. I didn't talk about Christ in the classroom or anything like that, but I did present both sides. And so I was okay. Indeed, there are some of these organizations there on the pink sheet actually publish guides to some of the national parks that give you the Christian creationist perspective on exactly what you're saying. Yeah. So it'd be useful if you're going to go to, for instance, the Grand Canyon or Yellowstone, to get a hold of those so that you at least can see the alternate correct picture. Yeah, exactly right.
Where was that resource? Debrief the children?
I forget which one it is that publishes those. I think it's Institute for Creation Research, probably, that has those guides, but I'm not 100% on that. You could probably Google creationist guides to the national parks. Creationist guides to the national parks would probably get you. There's 4 or 5 of them, I believe, in print now, or maybe more. Oh, a lot. I mean, ultimately, the evolutionist, if you get right down to it, is just as much based on faith as we are. It's as, well, yeah. It's as you said, it's your perspective, or your, as Ham has, you know, so well said, it's what kind of spectacles you're looking for. When Ken Ham and Bill Nye debated, what, 1.5 years or whatever ago, a big part of Ham's argument was, we've got, as you said, we've got these facts, one set of facts, and some people are looking at it one way, and we're looking at it another way. And you're all going back to the same facts. And the other big part of his argument was, evolutionists are not using operational experimental science. They're really operating in the area of historical science. But basically, yeah, it's a philosophy. There's some quote that says, you know, we got all this information, and if it didn't point to, well, how's it go? Basically, they were saying that the alternative to evolution, that would be a special creator, God, is unthinkable. Because to the atheist, you cannot have that possibility. And so it's very definitely a philosophy. It's just blinders on. You can't have a creation possibility because we don't accept that there is a God. So that option, that explanation is just excluded. You can't have it. So they have to find some other way to explain things, no matter how convoluted it is. It's definitely a philosophy, yes. And that's part of the reason we need to at least have the general concept that Christianity and science and creation are historical, they are defendable, because when our kids and grandkids go off to school or just to work, or you just watch TV or various movies or programs, they'll become indoctrinated and start to wonder, as you said, if you don't accept this, if this might not be right, well then, what about the rest of the Bible? It's a problem. Yeah. The real dyed-in-the-wool atheist evolutionist, you know, you may not want to engage with them because it may just degenerate into, you know, yelling at one another. But personal attacks, yeah. But the great mass of people haven't thought about this. The great mass of people, and I'm talking probably 90%, the great mass of people just believe or go along with what they see on the news or the TV or the video that they're shown in school or whatever, because it's the easy road to hoe. It's kind of like what Seth and then I think you pointed out a month or two ago here at one of the meetings that you know, there'll be opposition. But the great mass of people just go along. I found that in my teaching when I'd talk about here's some evidence. Oh, well, maybe evolution is not true. But they haven't seen the evidence. It's not been presented to them. You run into people who are honest like that every so often. I've got a number of quotes.
So he assumed that he was preaching to the choir.
Exactly, right. And that you weren't going to quote this out. But there are people who will acknowledge that. I've got a number of quotes. And yeah, there's a whole mess of topics we could address, but we can't. We've got to wrap this up. You could talk about geology and the fossils. You could talk about astronomy. A real exciting thing to me today is soft tissue that they find with blood cells and tendons and skin and coloration and stuff. How could this exist for millions of years? Well, it's obvious that it's much, 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 much more recent. Astronomy. We got the New Horizons spacecraft just passed by Pluto about a year and a half ago, I guess, and all kinds of strange things that don't fit in the evolutionary mindset. Just doesn't work. Pluto is young, like the other planets. When Voyager gave us pictures of the other outer planets, well, this doesn't fit the evolutionary view of the formation of the solar system. Yeah. It's a lot easier to follow along as the sheep than it is to stand against the tide. It surely is. We need to close, so let me pray and we'll go on. Lord, thank you for your creation. Thank you for your word. And though we know science changes, we know your word and you are constant. And we thank you that we can rely on you. And Lord, I pray that you would watch over and guide us. May we serve you well. May we honor you in everything we do, in every way, every day. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.